Hey John,
What?
tell me a story about the demolition derby at Ace Auto.
Oh yeah, yeah. So Kimric and I used to race at the enduro races at where was it?
Altamont.
Altamont. So our car had been smashed so many times that the tires were the body was like a foot smaller and the tires would stick out the side. So Kimric had this great idea: we should just go get a car body from Ace Auto and weld it to the outside.
Yeah, just to kind of beef it up a bit rather than trying to rebuild an entire car.
Right. So we were over at Ace trying to get fenders off of stuff and probably some other car parts because that's where we got all our stuff at the time. And this sweet little Volvo, mustard yellow Volvo rolls in. One owner, this old lady had driven it her whole life and traded into Billy for $200 or something. So Billy's like, if you want it, $300. So I'm out there looking at it, testing out the engine. Took it for a test drive. It had a pretty bad knock, and I was thinking, I don't know if I want to deal with this. So as I'm getting ready to roll out, this Chinese couple comes over with, what was the car?
It was like a white, just some square white K car, or just, something maybe a little later than that. Like a Ford.
Yeah. But it was a one owner. They were told they had bought it brand new off the lot. They were really heartbroken.
It was like 20 years old.
Yeah. So Billy's him and Han. He's like, I'll give you $100, and they were, we want 200. And he's like, 100, Anyway, so he finally, right as I pull back in, he says, I'll give you 125. And they're like, okay. So he gives them the cash. They sign off on the papers, and Billy gets in to drive this away. And right when I pull up, Billy says, well, what do you think? And I said, I think it's not going to work for me. And he's like, okay. Boom! And it just piles right into my door with the whole car.
Yeah,
like,
I was even sort of shocked.
And I'm like, what? And peeled out, put my seatbelt on as I'm doing a donut. Out comes
I think it was like Pervert or B-Man. I'm not sure which one.
And he comes ripping out of the junkyard in another car. And all of a sudden, there's this demolition derby right in front of these people.
On the street, and there's like, your thug life types and lowriders going by, and they're like, holy crap, people are just ramming each other in the street. It looked like some sort of major road rage issue was going on in front of them.
And at one point, I remember I got down to the end of the block to get a run back at them, and I made it about halfway and got T-boned, pushed up on the sidewalk, and collapsed around the corner of one of the buildings. And I was just like, holy shit. I mean, holy shit, this is fun, and holy shit, I'm going to die. And we went at it for probably 15, 20 minutes and just beat these cars to absolute, didn't run anymore.
And the person that had just sold it to Billy was still standing there in just like complete shock of like, what? They just had no, like, I was actually somewhat surprised too, so they were even more so.
So anyway, that's the demolition derby at Ace Auto, impromptu.
Yeah, that I guess also the same thing is that the white car from that was then used a couple days later for an event we were doing called the Slick 50 Challenge, because they always had these stupid Slick 50 ads to where we took this Maserati and put Slick 50 in it and took the oil pan off and drove it around the racetrack, and it didn't hurt the engine at all.
And the Volvo too, I remember that got in there too.
And so we took one, and my friend Scott had gotten a hold of about a pint of titanium tetrachloride.
All right, so the setup here is we have this show. We have 3 of these cars.
And everybody's in lab coats.
And we got the hood open on each one of them, and we got Chip doing this, we put Slick 50 in this car, and look what abuse it took. So he puts the Slick 50 in, and then we go down the row one by one, and we did horrible, horrible things to every one of these cars with Slick 50 in it while the engines are running.
And we poured like titanium tetrachloride into the carburetor wall, which is this incredibly corrosive compound that upon contacting air smokes like mad. And so it's just clouds of this stuff everywhere. And actually it did nothing to the car, and the car has actually survived reasonably well, but I think we had drained all the oil out.
And then the other one, we put this fountain, like
took a welding tank. No, you took a welding tank.
Filled it up with
Thermite.
off this whole container of molten metal and then yanked the bottom, releasing this
Which
molten
didn't really
metal
want to go. We had
into
to
the
keep
carburetor.
poking it with a rod to try and get it to go.
And it would kind of drip in there and go, and then you could hear like another knock, but it just kept running. And we had these things like,
Finally, the tank melted through on the
full
side. You can see the molten metal pouring into the engine, and it didn't do anything really to the engine. I mean, it kept running, except it just caught on fire because the metal was so hot. It just lit the engine oil on fire, and I think it died. And I was trying to get it started again, and we finally had to declare. And we had like an old, like Commodore 64 or something hooked up to it, so it's supposed to look like, we're getting readouts.
monitoring it. But the wonderful thing about the Ace was there's just everything we needed was right there. I mean, we just would show up with an idea and we'd run around and find all the bullshit and set the stage for this Friday night or Saturday night show and then just do it. And Billy on weekdays would say, hell yeah, and Belinda on the weekends would participate. And that was the beauty of Ace Auto.
Yeah, I got to where the cops were getting a little bit too wise, because whenever you did something interesting, there'd be a bit too much of a crowd, and then the cops would show up. And it's like, well, you can't do an event. It's like, well, it's private property. Well, you're charging money. It's like, back and forth, and it was like this whole thing. And, but, yeah, there was some awesome events that we did, like, Cookie Mongoloid played, and the one where they had Lloyd was doing his Devo cover band, and Mongoloid, and what they'd done is they had a big World War II Army crane in the junkyard, and he swung the crane around the back and almost over to another next street behind, and Lloyd had a climbing harness on and clipped to Lloyd, and he had a wireless on his electric guitar and the whole deal, and like picked him up and swung him all the way around and set him on stage. Problem is Lloyd was facing towards the audience when it picked him up, but as it spun around, so his back's to the audience, he's trying to turn around. There's like no way to turn the giant.
He's hung by this giant magnet.
So it's like turning around, he's coming down. Are we not men? It's like when he's facing away from the audience, and sets him down the stage.
And then we use that same crane for the bug squish.
Which B-Man made spent a couple days making a giant paper mache tennis shoe to go on the wrecking ball. And then I think Billy for like a week or so, a couple weeks, was setting aside all the VW bugs that came in. And I guess one guy had this car for a long time, and he wanted to see it destroyed, and actually paid some small amount of extra money to guarantee that the car would be crushed. And so we'd saved up, so that was sort of what inspired the show, and so we actually made a performance out of it. And he came, and a bunch of his friends, and a bunch of other people that knew. We had lights, and put smoke grenades in one of the cars, and was like swinging around the crane and running it into things.
But then there was the other woman that didn't know, that thought it was going to something else, and somebody had paid her. I just remember her being flipped out.
No, I had no idea.
But basically, these VW bugs would be set in the middle of this arena, and this giant crane would be dropped, and the magnet would be turned on, it would pick it up, and it'd slam it into other cars.
But a giant crane that looked like a tennis shoe.
Yeah.
Well, the wrecking ball looked like a
Wrecking
tennis
ball,
shoe, yeah.
yeah.
So it's a giant shoe stomping on bugs.
And all this equipment was just on the edge of collapse. Everything.
Yeah, the only
And-
person
and
that
you-
could really operate the crane was Billy. I mean, it was pretty much dangerous for anybody else, because it used like old clutching mechanisms, stuff to operate the clutches were really dicey, and so you could wheel the ball up and like cram it into the crane end and things like that if you weren't careful.
And all the cars that were in the junkyard would have been now stacked on top of each other in layers. So you'd be leaning up against a pile of cars up above you. And then you'd use all the tires in the junkyard to sort of designate safety areas and non-safe areas. But by the end of it, everybody was everywhere because there was no room in there. So it was one of those places you didn't wear your best clothes to.
Well, I used to just go down, because Billy did.
And you should definitely be aware of your surroundings as the bug flew over your head.
Yeah, because they didn't just get like cars in, he got like metal scrap, and so I got the boiler and the air tank that I use for making the pressure washer and air tank that I used for making the engine, the boiler for the steam car that I built out of stuff that came out of there. And I mean, I fixed my motorcycle. I mean, I had a Datsun 1200, and the seat was completely rotted out. I just went around and started measuring stuff and found one out of a minivan and swapped that out. And
I mean, Billy went all the way back to the SRL days.
yeah, no, that's how I got to know
all
him.
of our stuff. That's how, yeah, exactly. We just like, there's this weird scrap guy, and hey, you got this? What are you doing? And we tell him. He's like, oh, cool. Here, take all this stuff. I mean, pretty much, if it was for art, Billy
He wouldn't
just
really
gave it
take
to you.
anything for it.
Yeah.
And I did, I got a nice light fixture in my house that came in there. It was like random, some 1930s Craftsman area thing someone's throwing out, and I restored it. And
The cars would come in sometimes full of stuff, and you just like, I don't know what's
yeah,
in
well,
there.
Jericho did that.
Open it up, and you're just like, whoa, check this out. There's tools in here. There's
Well, there was like a van that came in completely full of records, and Jericho for like a year did an entire tour called the Dead Man's Record Show, and actually DJ'd using only the records that were in the van. And I remember, we did like it to some club, and people just were not digging it at all, which was actually more funny than if they had dug it. 'Cause we were playing John Philip Sousa stuff and things, and people were like trying to hang out and hit on each other at this bar. Wasn't working for them.
and then there was a power tool drag races.
The Power Tool Drag Races was pretty epic. It went from a little thing into the Learning Channel was down there filming it, but that's actually pretty well documented, unlike a lot of the other stuff, because like we did, was it the Phenomenauts? What had happened is back when people just wanted content on their webpage, and it didn't almost seem to really matter what it was, but you had to update your content like every couple of weeks to keep your website interesting. And supposedly, if your website was interesting, I think the money model was that then you could charge a subscription and people would pay to see what interesting things you had on your website, which everybody knows how well that worked. And, but there was a game company that, I don't recall exactly how I got to know this guy, Doug Sackman, and he there was a game company that wanted they wanted stuff to put on their website, and they wanted the current news things.
Was this the things that could fly? Or
No,
was
well,
this-
that was part of it, but it started, well, that was something I actually wanted to do to begin with. But it
So
started
things
out
that
with
shouldn't fly.
the things that might fly if you put enough rockets on them. And, but which originally I was gonna do for Weird TV, I think Chuck Serino did an episode down at Ace Auto. But, so I'm like, well, I'm gonna get some use out of it. He goes, oh, well, Evening Magazine wants to do an article, and so he actually gave me like $500 to, as a budget to come down and do. So I took like a globe, we took a taxidermied like alligator head, I had toy robots, mannequin heads, Barbie dolls, I don't know what other random things, and we just stuck like these engines. Some of them were handmade ones left over from when I was doing Burning Man. And so we were flying all these things. Like the taxidermied alligator head was actually the most terrifying, because it pretty much went up about 6 feet and then went sideways. And was like ricocheting off the cars. I mean, you couldn't really even tell what it was going so fast. And I was sort of imagining having to go to the hospital, because you put your arm up at this
crocodile
head with a rocket motor attached to it, like, in the hospital trying to get this, to get this thing taken off your arm. Yeah,
I think this is bad. You just see the crocodile.
But we did that. We did like a one where we had read somewhere about some guy like doing a thing where they could suck up gasoline with a vacuum cleaner.
Oh God, I remember these.
And so we started just getting every vacuum cleaner that came into Ace Auto and doing this. And the canister vacuums were great, because you would suck
you
up
basically
fuel.
suck gasoline, so it's also sucking in air, and then
Yeah.
you light the outtake of the vacuum.
Yeah, we had like a neon transformer and a spark plug and an arc.
Turbocharge.
And you would get like this blue-white cone of flame coming out of the vacuum cleaner. But the flame usually was hot enough that it would start compromising the vacuum cleaner. What got exciting is when the flame made it past the fan blades. Like usually the fan blades would melt. We actually had things where they fragged and came out through the body of the vacuum
Because
cleaner.
by then everything had gotten hot enough and all
But the
metal
flame got
parts-
past there into the canister
Yeah, and then it
of
would
fuel
start
air mix, and a whole top of the
combusting.
vacuum cleaner would just boom and flew like, you know,
Yes.
20 feet in the air.
It was very entertaining, and it, you know, like Craftsman, Plastic Vacs, Electrolux, I mean, every one of these vacuums had a different composition and a different
We had an old
way that it would fail.
We had an old like Acme one or whatever, and it was all aluminum and steel. And the thing, I filmed the whole. It took it like 12 minutes to disintegrate. I mean, you could actually see bits of the blades coming out of the exhaust, the metal of the vacuum melting and being aluminum being sucked in, and just being blown out as like liquid out the exhaust. And it just kept going and going. The bearings failing, but the one that was fun was I did, but the same guy that had me do these other things, because it's funny, it's just as I did all those, he was gonna have me, I made a replica of the gun from Quake, the rocket launcher, and I was making a working model of the Quake game rocket launcher, and what he was gonna do is get all these, they were getting all these cardboard standees of Sonic the Hedgehog and all these things and be like, let's try this video game against this video game. And it's like, what would a gun from Quake do to Sonic the Hedgehog? And we were gonna, because video was so low budget back then that you could actually have like spliced and cut it and people couldn't tell that there was a little wire that the rocket was flying down and things. But the whole internet crashed like that month, you know, the whole .com thing died, and so suddenly there was no more money for that. But what it did lead to somebody calling me, it was like, so you know somebody that does such and such and this, and I'm like, well, who is this? You know, somebody starts asking you about explosives or pyro by, you know, that late in the game. It was getting, after 9/11, it was getting a little bit dicey. And so it turned out that it's somebody who knew this guy, and it was for the Warped Tour, was having the rock and roll, the punk rock holocaust. And they wanted me to blow up the Phenomenauts band. And but they didn't have like a real plot or anything, so I kind of threw together a plot and did a bunch of other special effects over in their warehouse. But then we had to get the van, which was falling apart, across the Bay Bridge, and they actually got, because the van just had all this shit glued all over it, so it kind of looked like a space shuttle or something.
And it was a double wide. Like,
Double wide van that barely ran, and the engine was fried, and so they actually got escorted across the Bay Bridge because it just seemed so suspicious, and it was like only about a month or two after 9/11. And so it was like, little did they know it was actually going across the bridge to be blown up. And so we took it to Ace Auto, and I used flower bombs, which made it look like these massive explosions, but made no more noise than someone slamming a car door. We blew it up repeatedly over a period of like 2 to 3 hours from all these different angles, and I was, you had the big fiberglass, like plexiglass window that wouldn't explode, so I was like, we launched, I used a cut-off fire extinguisher and fired a 2-liter soda bottle full of water through the window, which punched the window out one piece, but we had put lights on the ground shining up so that the water droplets looked like flying glass. And so we blew this up at Ace, and then Billy dressed up like the ninja that was supposedly killing everybody at the tour, Warped Tour, and operated the crane, and like came and crushed the crane, was supposedly with the whole band still in it.
across the van, you mean?
Yeah, crushed the band, you know, pretty much just dropped the weight on it repeatedly. And it stayed there like the next morning, I guess. Oh no, it jammed and we couldn't lift it. That's what happened. The cable came off. So like when, Pervert came in the next morning, there's this van with the weight on it and the crane just stuck there. So it took a part of the next day.
It was always open to some crazy thing that we would come up with.
Like we had a birthday party for Billy, and we had like a pancake, it was kind of a surprise party, and we did it at Ace, and it was like a big pancake thing and beer, and we had, somebody collected up like tons of lug nuts and brought golf clubs, and we were playing like lug nut golf and trying to break windows and cars, and everyone's dressed really nice.
I think that's enough.
It's enough for now.